Johnny Mac, 97.3 ESPN.com. He's got his column up at GetMoreSports.com on the NFL. His latest, we will dive into that as well in just a little bit. I do want to get into the football here as the Eagles had a week of OTAs and really got swept under the rug a little bit with the fact that all of these NFL rules came out. So I do want to dive into that. John has a piece up at 97.3ESPN.com with the Eagles OTA depth chart. We want to take a look at just the state of the roster currently right now, John. And we all know that we talked a lot about Nick Foles and where Carson Wentz is. But at this time, we know at that quarterback position that this is really, Wentz and Foles. But behind them, we talked a lot about Sudfeld in the offseason, that if they were going to trade Foles, it meant that they really liked Nate Sudfeld. And you got a local kid in Joe Callahan there as well. Is this the number 3 spot, Nate Sudfeld, do you think, going into training camp coming up next month? Or do you think that there is a battle for the number 3 spot?
No, the Eagles love Nate Sudfeld, and that's one of, Joe Banner mentioned today the fact that how much they like him, and that could fuel the Nick Foles trade later this summer, or certainly by the trade deadline. I think there's no doubt as long as Carson Wentz is healthy, obviously, that's a luxury you have to take advantage of. And I think the Eagles realize it. I think Nick probably realizes it deep down. And the fact that they do like Nate Sudfeld a lot and do think he can project to be certainly a backup quarterback in this league. There were 2 great quotes I got from OTAs this week, and one of them was from Matt Collins, and this kind of tells you, now it's hyperbole, but he's talking about his quarterbacks, and he said, we had the guy who should have been the MVP, and that's Carson Wentz he was speaking of, the guy who was the Super Bowl MVP, which is obviously Nick Foles, and a future MVP, and that's what he thinks about Nate Sudfeld. Now, hey, I'm not buying that. I don't think that's a possibility. But this team likes Nate Sudfeld a lot. And not to say they don't like Joe. They brought him in for a reason. They need a camp arm. And ultimately, if they do trade Nick, he'll have an opportunity to make this football team. But it's not going to be at the expense of Nate Sudfeld.
Yeah, because I really thought that the whole Foles thing came down to how much they believed in Nate Sudfeld. In other words, okay, Carson Wentz misses 2 or 3 games. How much do we trust Sudfeld playing those 2 or 3 games? You know what I mean? Like, it was more about Sudfeld to me than it was about Carson Wentz's health, the decision on Foles, which ultimately looked like they decided to keep Foles even though they had a pretty good offer on the table.
Yeah, and if they did have that offer and they did turn it down for whatever reason, whether they didn't think it was enough, which is what I would surmise, or they actually let Nick kind of drive the conversation, which I find very, very hard to believe. I'll just say that. Whatever the real story is on why they turned down the 35th overall pick, I think it was a mistake for a number of reasons. Number one, again, even if you don't have the confidence they have in Nate Sudfeld, which they do, you can get by 2 or 3 games. Worst case scenario, you go 0-2, you go 0-3. You can still rebound to make the playoffs with a healthy Carson Wentz and make a run in the postseason. So I don't put much stock into that. The reality is the Eagles do value Nick Foles. They think he has tremendous value, and they don't want to give him up for essentially – not going to say nothing because the 35th overall pick is very, very significant, but they think they deserve more for somebody who did what he did in the playoffs and in the Super Bowl. I don't know how realistic that is, but I think that's their thinking, and it's pretty clear it really doesn't have that much to do with the health of Wentz or their belief in Nate Sudfeld.
I know you guys saw Carson Wentz earlier in the week, and we're not allowed to really check out the practice, but here we are about the end of the week now, at the end of the week, and seeing that video of Carson Wentz and, getting a chance to talk to him on what was that, Tuesday. I know I personally didn't feel that he'd be ready. I know you felt pretty strongly that he would be, but is there any question now, or any question now that he's not only ready for week 1, but that we might see him in any of the preseason games? Like, will he be cleared and ready for training camp, do you think?
No, I don't think he'll be cleared for team drills in training camp. Now, obviously, he did a tremendous amount of work already, and we're in May as far as individuals go. That is the big surprise. We did not think we'd be seeing that until much later in the process. So it's very clear he's going to be doing quite a bit of work as far as throwing the football. You saw some of those videos I posted of him working on his footwork, his mechanics, things of that nature in individual work. And then when they get into team drills, he's going to sit. And I expect that to continue through training camp. Remember, in the modern NFL, training camp ends a little bit more quickly than it did in the past. So you basically break camp really before that third game now. So I ultimately think that's when he'll be cleared to practice, when training camp is over and you start ramping up for the regular season. I don't think he'll play in the preseason still, because I don't think he needs to play in the preseason. I don't think any good can come from it. But I do think he will be cleared to practice, and he'll be preparing for week 1 in the Atlanta Falcons.
Hey, John, there's a report out there that Corey Clement wants more touches, more carries, more catches out of the backfield this year. Is there anything to that, or is that just the natural progression of where he is going in his second season?
I mean, there's nothing bad about it. Of course, he's a running back. He wants the football. I think all running backs want the football. And I think if you talk to Jay Ajayi, he would say the same thing. If you talk to Darren Sproles, when he's healthy, he'd say the same thing, all the way down to the guys who are going to be fighting for roster spots, Donnell Pumphrey and Wendell Smallwood and Matt Jones and even Josh Adams. Everybody wants the football. And, you know, Corey right now is projected to be the second running back on this team, and sort of Darren Sproles mixing in as the third down back. So he should get more touches. He should have a more of an opportunity to contribute to this offense, and I think it's deserved by the way he improved throughout last season. But there also remains a lot of competition. So if he doesn't approach things the same way he did last year when he worked so tirelessly to lose weight and gain quickness, he could lose that spot very, very quickly. But that's what the Eagles want. They want competition, so guys are pushed. And I expect Corey to be a big part of that running back by committee.
In your interactions with him, is he a guy that sulks or gets disappointed, or does he understand that, you know, there's only so many touches to go around?
Oh, no, he doesn't. He's not a sulker at all. I mean, if you think about it, if anything, he's the kind of guy who's got a chip on his shoulder because he was a heck of a college player and he wasn't drafted. And, you know, if you go really early in the process, a lot of people talked about him as a potential third, fourth round pick. And then it sort of took a nosedive, and he ended up undrafted, ended up here, obviously. And that's probably, he realizes that was, in hindsight, the best thing that could have happened to him. You know, you're talking about a very young kid who's now a Super Bowl champion for, in essence, his hometown team. He's doing commencement speeches at Rowan in his early 20s, which I haven't accomplished that yet. I don't know about you guys. So things have worked out pretty well for Corey, and he's very happy with the situation. It's just competitiveness, and like I said, the running back's mentality, very similar to good wide receivers. They always want the football.
So do you think the touches will be there for him is really the ultimate question because of the sharing mentality, and there's only so many guys to go around? Will he get enough to A, be happy, and B, be productive?
Yeah, I think he'll be happy, and he'll be sort of take the next step in his career. Remember, if Darren Sproles doesn't go down last year in week 3, Corey's probably deep end of the roster special teams guy. He probably gets little opportunity to play in the base offense. He took advantage of it. We know what he was able to do in the Super Bowl. And now he has elevated himself to where we would talk about, can Wendell Smallwood take that next step and be a big part of the offense? LeGarrette Blount, and when they brought in Jay Ajayi as the committee approached, he's now LeGarrette Blount, essentially. He's going to be in that role with Jay Ajayi, and then Darren, as I said, will mix in as the third down back.
Now, you wrote today, John, about Donnell Pumphrey at 97.3 ESPN.com. Is he legitimately in the mix to not only make the team but also have a role?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's in the mix to make the team, no question. I don't know about having a role. As I said, it's pretty clearly defined this time going in, unless injuries take over with those top 3 guys. You're fighting for that 4th spot. And if you think about the 4th spot last year, after Darren got hurt towards the end of the season, it was Kenyon Barner who would get a touch here or there, but not a significant role because it's going to be tough. Jay Ajayi is a very good player. He's got the chronic knee injuries, but he's going to get his touches. Corey, we just talked about, and Darren, I don't think there's another player on this team that Doug Peterson trusts more. So it's going to be hard to overtake those 3 guys, but he's certainly in the mix to make the roster, no question about that.
John McMullen is with us here on the Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. Follow him at JF McMullen. He's on the Boardwalk on the hotline. The wide receiver, Mac Hollins, Alshon's not here. Bryce Treggs is back. Marquise Wilson, Mike Wallace, free agent. We haven't talked a lot about him. We also got Marcus Wheaton, who's been a pro in the league, and Shelton Gibson, who was a draft pick last year. Nelson Aguilar, Greg Ward. So there's a lot of bodies at the wide receiver position. Any guys, especially guys like Shelton Gibson, who was drafted last year, any guys that you think maybe came back much improved, or any outsiders that are now here that you think are going to improve upon this position?
Well, I think the one guy to keep an eye on would be Marcus Wheaton, because he's a really good receiver if healthy. Has been healthy in 2 years, though, so it's a big question mark. I think it's going to be really interesting if he's able to prove he could sort of be that guy who was ascending at one time in Pittsburgh. If that guy shows up, all of a sudden you have some interesting problems, but they're good problems to have, because you have it's always good when you're trying to decide between good football players, and obviously that's going to only improve things. Alshon's going to be healthy for training camp. He's the number 1 receiver on this team. Mike Wallace is penciled in to take Torrey Smith's role. Nelson Aguilar has now turned the corner. I think we can officially say that. He's a very good slot receiver in this league. And then Mac Hollins is sort of number 4. If that Marcus Wheaton from Pittsburgh shows up, though, that's a guy who's going to find his way on the field, because that player, the Steelers version, is a pretty good receiver.
John, tight end was interesting. Last year, Ertz was great, but then you had Burton, who was, when he filled in, really produced. You had Selleck, the veteran. You think Ertz gets more time, a bigger role, or are some newcomers going to be more incorporated into this offense?
Well, no, I mean, I don't think you can play Zach much more than he did. He plays a heck of a lot. He's basically the one tight end that's always on the field when he's healthy. So he's maxed out. The question is, what does Doug want to do? I think they've elevated the talent level. As good as Trey Burton was, and he'll always be a legend in this town, obviously, for the Philly special. Look, he doesn't have the physical skills of Dallas Goedert. It's not even close. As far as a receiving tight end, The question is, obviously, he's a rookie. How quickly are you able to ramp him up? How quickly does he sort of develop in the NFL? Eventually, I don't think there's any question. We talk about 3-4 years down the line, he's going to be a much better player than Trey Burton ever was. And if he does hit the ground running, and if he is impactful early in his career, it's going to be interesting what Doug wants to do, because then he has to have some conversations about who would he rather have on the field as far as 11 personnel. Does he want 3 receivers? Does he want 2 tight ends on the field a lot? Since he's been here for 2 years, he's always preferred 11 personnel, which is the 3 receivers. However, he's never had another tight end to pair with Zach Ertz like Dallas Goedert, at least from a physical skill set and gift standpoint. So a lot of it depends on how quickly Dallas, as I said, sort of translates to the NFL from a small school environment. But if he's good, it's gonna be some interesting conversations, because you do have to have them at that point.
Yeah, that should be fun to watch that as we get through these OTAs. And then, of course, that offensive line, John, Peters is back, which is, amazement in itself that he's out there for these OTAs. Wisniewski, Kelsey, Brooks, and Johnson. You got the same group out there. Got to feel pretty good about that. But do you think they upgraded behind there?
I think they have the best offensive line in football, first off, and it only gets better if Jason Peters is healthy, and he will be for the regular season. He'll be back, and even though he is 36 years old, and even though Vaitai at times played very well as his replacement, those two are not close. So on paper, it gets even better, and then you mix Big V back into the swing tackle position. So from that alone, you have better depth. So I don't think there's any doubt about it. That is perhaps the biggest strength on the Philadelphia Eagles. It was last year. It will be this year. You could argue defensive line as well, but without Tim Jernigan, that kind of skews things. It's just a really, really good group. And you think about it, you have a guy who's going to the Hall of Fame at left tackle. You have an all-pro center, and you have a Pro Bowl right guard and an all-pro right tackle. And Stefan Wisniewski is sort of the run of the litter, and that's a veteran who just knows how to play. And when that's your worst offensive lineman, you're in pretty good shape.
The underrated Stefan Wisniewski, says me at least. I don't know how John McMullen feels about him, but I always think he gets overlooked. So, John, we'll take a look at the defense on Tuesday when Jim Schwartz will be speaking. But what about the coaching staff and some of the changes? Any read from you on the new guys, including a new guy who will also be speaking on Tuesday, or a guy in a new position, Mike Groh?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest question marks of this team, because the Eagles lost, maybe more so than the players they lost. They lost 2 really good coaches, and the 2 coaches that worked most closely with not only Doug Peterson, but the quarterbacks, Carson Wentz and Nick Foles. And look, you can say it's easy to replace Frank Reich and John DeFilippo. I don't think it's going to be easy. I really don't. Mike Groh gets elevated from wide receivers coach to offensive coordinator. Press Taylor, who was John's assistant, is now the quarterbacks coach. Look, that hurts. You're not as good as you were last year at 2 significant coaching positions. And that's just what happens in this league. Doesn't mean you can't overcome it, but it's one of the things we're going to have our eye on throughout the offseason and really throughout the entire season, because this is a big step up for both of those coaches.
John McMullen covers the NFL and the Eagles, 97.3 ESPN.com. You can follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. And make sure you take time out and read his piece on Colin Kaepernick at GetMoreSports.com. We'll discuss that plenty more coming up next week right here on the Sports Bash, and the Eagles finishing up their OTAs. John, enjoy the Memorial Day weekend, and a lot of football still to come on the horizon, we know, as the NFL never takes a break.
No, it never does, and we'll be back on the practice field Tuesday, right for the show.
That's right. Jim Schwartz and Mike Groh will be speaking. We will have plenty of coverage with John on that. Thanks, John. Have a great weekend, pal.
All right, you too, guys.